Today, we'll talk about solution-focused therapy, or SFT, and my objective is to provide a solid overview of the model and also incorporate a case review so that it can be understood from a practical standpoint. The SFT model was developed by Stephen DeShazer and his wife Insoo Kim Berg. One of the things that come to mind about this model is the miracle question. Although it's essential to SFT, it's also a question that many of us ask ourselves from time to time. If we look at this model from a global perspective, it's a constructivist therapy model, meaning that, in a sense, reality is constructed in each one of us. As a result, therapists pay close attention to exactly how clients have used their life experiences and self-constructed narratives to relate to their current circumstances. Just like CBT, treatment is action-based with a focus on positively influencing future behaviors. Here's the mind map, and if you look closely, you'll see a big emphasis on strengths and solutions. Now let's focus on the case of Marcella. Pause the video to read about what's bringing her to therapy. We'll conceptualize her case in just a moment, but for now, let's look at the central constructs of the SFT model so we can begin to think about applying the model to her case. There are 5 central and foundational constructs of solution-focused therapy: exceptions, change talk, solutions, strengths and resources, and simplicity. First, let's talk about exceptions. There's always a time when the problem does not happen. Finding this out requires that the therapist develops a detective-like ability to discover even the most minute exceptions to problems. Let's think about exceptions in terms of Marcella. When were her problems not prevalent? We're not talking about the death of her brother, which remains constant, but rather the way she views his death and how it impacts her life. One exception in her case might be seeking out her close friend for support instead of suffering alone. Now, the second central construct is change talk, which is a way of bringing about change and focusing on the future. Even at the outset of treatment, the counselor believes that change is already taking place and asks the client if any changes had occurred between the time the appointment was made and the first session. In the therapy video, the therapist elaborates on this process, which is called pre-treatment changes. Small actions, no matter how small, are encouraged in order to make a difference in the client's life. What changes might Marcella choose to make for herself? This could include setting a schedule to reach out to her family, even if on a superficial level at first. The third central construct is solutions, helping clients find acceptable solutions to the problems they bring to therapy. This really goes against the traditional view that therapy should involve deeper long-term processing or empirically based studies to promote change. Now, to do this, solution-focused therapists acclimate their clients to scaling questions, and remember, we also call them subjective units of distress, or SUDs. Reframing is also used to help clients find other ways of looking at the problem. How might reframing be helpful for Marcella? Now, I've provided one example here. See if you can think of one more. The next construct is strengths and resources, and how they relate to the client's own value systems. This might remind you of acceptance and commitment therapy because of its focus on values. What are the strengths of the client, personally, relationally, socially, financially, and spiritually? The fifth and final central construct is simplicity. One of the principal architects of SFT was Steve DeShazer, who said, "Complex problems do not need complex solutions." Therapists don't depend on thick case notes, but rather finding simple steps towards solutions, which could be as basic as taking a walk or keeping a journal. Could these steps be helpful for Marcella? Before moving on, I want to show you an activity that I plan to do in class to help us develop a better understanding of some of the SFT central constructs. Case conceptualization, when viewed from a solution-focused lens, really encompasses the constructs we've already talked about, so we'll keep this in mind when conceptualizing Marcella's case. First, we conceptualize in terms of the future, specifically in terms of solutions, which represents the future, instead of problems or where the client has been. We think in terms of solution generating, so for Marcella, we incorporate her desire to have a good relationship with her family, to regain self-confidence, and feel at peace about the loss of her brother, and to pursue her dream of becoming a pediatrician. Next, we incorporate exceptions and previous solutions into the case conceptualization, and for Marcella, this includes exceptions such as horseback riding and a supportive friend, which in both cases would be helpful when considering concrete solutions to her problems. Now please note that the future-oriented FST case conceptualization platform is much different from that of other models such as the basic ID, which we used for the CBT model. So at this point, think about which one or both resonates most with you. Now let's move to goals and interventions of solution-focused therapy. And there are 4 goals to discuss. First, we work towards developing specific, attainable, realistic goals, and this process represents a mutual journey between therapist and client. Next, the client defines the goals, but the therapist makes sure that the goals are attainable. We usually think of them in terms of SMART goals, and this could be a good acronym to keep in mind when setting goals with your clients. Third, the goals must be observable and expressed in concrete terms. Remember, they must be observable. So for Marcella, this goal would be considered vague. But the one after it could be very helpful in bringing about positive change. For the 4th and final goal, unwanted behaviors are replaced, and according to SFT, we change the doing, change the viewing, or how we view our problems, and evoke resources, personal strengths, and solution as part of our change routine. For this person in the picture, a therapist would look at challenging his thinking, and this process may even be similar to cognitive restructuring. With this in mind, what would be 2 or 3 goals that Marcella might set for herself? Interventions of the SFT model should already sound familiar to you. Although there are many, we'll discuss 6 interventions, and here's a brief overview. First, we have the miracle question, which I mentioned earlier. It's such a popular intervention that many non-SFT counselors use it in their practices. Here's a dialogue between therapist and client about how to utilize the miracle question in therapy. Please pause the video as needed. Note that in the therapy video, the therapist provides a demonstration of the miracle question intervention as well. Next, we utilize questions, which are often open-ended and success-oriented. Here are some questions to consider. Next, normalizing the problem is important because it helps the client see his or her problem from a different perspective. Read the following example and consider how the therapist is normalizing Marcella's problem, while also pointing out an important strength, which is her determination to improve relations with her family. Next, we have scaling questions, which I mentioned earlier. Next, there are coping questions, such as what worked for you, in which we find out how a client coped with a specific problem. A final intervention is write, read, and burn for obsessive and depressed clients. It's definitely a novel approach and not for all clients, but it can be helpful in seeing the problem in a new light. Note that you can modify the techniques and always ensure that clients do this as safely as possible. Now let's consider the cultural implications of SFT, and research has shown that this model can be effective across cultural settings. It can be readily adapted to the client's value system. Therapists can use SFT to help clients identify culturally based strengths in order to identify their experiences of diversity. Keep in mind also that because language is an integral aspect of culture, solution-focused therapists must be cognizant and respectful of the client's language and its unique impact on functioning. So how might Marcella's treatment be different depending on her cultural background? What if she was a California native or first or second generation immigrant from another country? Finally, let's look at this story from the Bible about the bleeding woman. We know little about her beyond her ailment, which was surely painful to endure over such a long period of time. What elements of SFT might be apparent in this story? If we imagine that she was a client, what components of SFT might come to mind? What might the miracle question look like for her? And how might therapy lead her to ultimately touching the edge of Jesus' cloak and achieving her goal of becoming healed? I hope this has been helpful, and have a great weekend.